Are human beings overpopulated? Is it even possible to be overpopulated as a human species? This is what we're talking about today. Welcome. My name is Ketzel, and I remind people of who they've always been through timeless principles that are intertwined with nature. So, I put out this video, right? This reel that was about overpopulation. And I received a lot of people stating that they simply didn't agree with this concept that Earth can be overpopulated by humans or that the Earth is overpopulated by humans, right? And I love when I get this type of response because it lets me know that this is a growth point for humanity. This is something that we can talk about, have a discussion about that can potentially lead to growth. Because it's cool. I mean, and I appreciate when I put out content that gets received and welcomed. But at the same time, I feel like there is a lack of growth there because we're not facing the things that bring challenges, right? So when I put out content and in this way and it gets received in a way where people don't agree with it, I love it because I want to get on here and discuss it because it's a nuanced topic, first of all, but also because it's something that must be addressed. Okay. So, you know, if you want to send your request to come in, definitely do that. And also, let me just explain for people, give them a explanation of what I meant because, like I said, in 1 minute video, you really can't tell the whole story, right? So, really, I wasn't making a case for overpopulation or not overpopulation. I was really saying that energy does not is not created, right? Like this law of thermodynamics that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's mostly is just transformed, right? So when we're talking about overpopulation, I think a lot of people get it misconstrued that yes, we can exist and grow the human population, but we're not talking about what the repercussions of that are. So even though there's things that we can do, we have to realize what the repercussions of that are. So when energy gets displaced from one organism to another, that is an impact. That's a consequence of that action. So if you grow a human population bigger and bigger and bigger, this means that the resources that are being generated at any given moment, because life works in cycles, right? We have to respect and honor the cycles because like we could have an abundance mindset, but just think if we have that mindset and we're not conscious that we need to harvest only a certain amount so that next year there could be a regrowth of that plant, or that we shouldn't take more than we absolutely need of an animal because we need to give them space and time to reproduce and repopulate. If we operate off the mindset that we could never extinguish any of the resources that we rely on, then we fail to realize the cycles of life and the timing of things. And that's what being conscious and aware is about. And that's what traditional people have always done. We've always moved in a way to where we're taking in a conscious manner, not because we don't believe we can take more, but because we know that there's repercussions to not thinking about how much we're taking. That's the difference. Obviously, we could take more. Obviously, the human population could continue to grow and grow and grow and expand. But I'm asking the question now, what are the repercussions of that? Right? So when we're talking about growing a population and of any species, of any organism, in order to do that, you have to take from another organism. So you are displacing energy. That's all we're doing. We're displacing energy. The reason there's a lot of humans on the earth, the reason there's a lot of domesticated animals on the earth is because that energy has been displaced from other organisms in the wild and focused to these organisms. Now, I'm not making a judgment off of that, whether that's right or wrong. All I'm saying is that that's what's happening. So because that there's a huge concentration of these particular organisms, that takes away from the energy and the biodiversity of the wild organisms. And that's exactly what we see that's happening when we look into studies of the Amazon and the biodiversity of the earth. We see that it's getting reduced, that it's becoming lower. But when we look at the populations of domesticated animals and humans, we can see that their numbers are very high, and there's no chance that that's going to go away anytime soon. So it's like this thing is growing. So all this energy from this diversity is getting basically homogenized. It's just getting homogenized into very few species. So that's the point that I was trying to make, that energy is just being displaced into very few organisms when it could be distributed over a more diverse group of organisms on the earth. And biodiversity is the mechanism by which nature ensures that life continues. So the more biodiversity we have, the more that benefits the earth. The less of it that we have, the more we fall victim to catastrophic things like disease and plague, because we don't have the diversity to be able to fight these things off, right? So that's the piece that people aren't seeing. A lot of people were making the assumption that I was agreeing with a so-called elite group, and I don't call nobody elite, because even me putting in that way infers that I believe that I'm inferior to somebody else, which I don't. But I know that there's a lot of people who believe that this is some sort of propaganda, and that's not the angle that I'm coming at it from at all, because I know at the end of the day, people are going to do what they want to do. But what my goal is to bring awareness to our actions, not to demonize them, not to say, oh, this is too much, there's too many people on earth. Like, no, because I know at the end, things are going to be balanced out anyways. Like, okay, so say for instance, at some point we had like, let's just throw random numbers, but just to make an explanation, so we can picture it in our minds. So we have, let's say we have 10% humans on Earth as a population, and then we have 90% of all other organisms. That's a diverse set of organisms. Okay, but then we can also have the reverse end of that, which is 90% of human population taking the energy, and then 10% is the other organisms. So they both equal 100, but the distribution of that is different, and it has an impact on the way life functions. So yes, we could have more humans. Yes, we could grow more people. We could produce more people, but there are consequences to that. And what are those consequences? Loss of biodiversity, increasingly psychological impact from living in confined and enclosed spaces, which we see very clearly. The studies indicate that the more you pack people into tight spaces, that the more their psychological health suffers because of that. Like, we need wild spaces to roam to. We need places that are not disturbed by housing complexes and shopping centers. Like, that's important for humans to live. So a lot of the times in these population studies, that's not accounted for. It's basically, can we physically fit people in a given space and feed them? And that's cool, but for me, that's not the type of qualifications that I look for existence of human population, because I know that we require a lot more than just those basic principles, and my standard is a lot higher for humanity. So that's what I meant when I made that video, that there's consequences to shifting the balance in the distribution of energy and life on planet Earth. And that's what we're seeing, and what we're experiencing at this moment: the loss of biodiversity and people's psychological health being depleted, basically. And obviously, a lot of us are choosing to go out of the cities to live in more rural spaces to combat this effect. But that's literally all I'm pointing out, is that the more you go that way, the more you produce that. The more you go this way, the more you produce that. So I'm just pointing things out. I don't make judgments on whether things are good or bad, or I have those type of emotions. I'm just trying to really logically analyze my reality and present it in a way that makes sense, that makes sense and is easy to understand. So that's the gist of it. So now I'm gonna let people come in. Please, like this video, share it, so that people could be notified about it and spread this conversation to other people. So I'm gonna bring Nini in, if she still wants to go live, and see what she got to say about the whole thing. Oh shit, let me put my headphones on.
Hi.
Hey, Peace, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So you actually bring really strong points, and I actually learned a lot of these points from you, and I also think that overpopulation is like bound to happen when there are humans implementing their like their hand into the cycle of life and death. Like, for example, there can definitely be abundance in population when we're controlling like people's fate of dying, like when we
Right.
have people in hospitals and it was their fate was to already be gone, but we're kind of controlling that fate because we have such a like low level relationship with death. And I was able to come to that realization because you actually brought that idea that like we don't have a relationship with death, and we kind of see it as like just like this abomination to life. And like you really kind of just expanded my awareness on that, even though like I already knew, but like you just kind of like reminded me of that. And
Right.
yeah.
That's a really good point that you bring up, because I don't want to like, I'm not trying to make people feel uncomfortable, but I am about to share some stuff that might people might perceive as uncomfortable, but that's just the reality of our existence. Like, so yeah, you're right. We do a lot to keep people alive past their natural life expectancy, perhaps. And I know people are going to say conversely on the other end, we also have a lot of contraception and things that intervene with bringing life into this world, but that's something that's relatively new. Like that hasn't been the case for like since the 1800s or nothing like that. It's relatively new, but back in the days and in traditional people when they didn't have hospitals and they didn't have the technology to keep people alive past their due time, what nature was saying, for instance, even with infants, if they were come in born deformed or they were sick, they would kill them. It's called infanticide. They wouldn't let that life continue because it would be a hardship and struggle on the community, and they just didn't have what we have now to be able to go around that, right? So that was just the reality of life for people living on the land. So that's one area where, yeah, it sounds crazy and gruesome to us, but like I think that when we're confronted with that, we have so many tools nowadays to be able to not have to confront it, to go around it, that we think that that's normal. So because we constructed this reality where we could hide death, kind of, where it's kind of behind curtains and in institutions, we don't deal with it ourselves. We have this distorted perception of death. So we believe that everything should be alive and survive all the time, no matter what. And that's just not part of the life cycle. Like people, when people want to make an emotional, compelling argument, they'll say something like people are dying. And I'm just like, yeah, they should be dying. Like if people stop dying, like that would be an issue. Like that would be a problem if people stop dying. That's not in tune with the life cycle. But so for me, like I try to disconnect myself emotionally from that kind of perception because I know it clouds people's judgment. And so when we're talking about overpopulation, is this idea that we've gotten to a place that I don't think people want to accept that there's no easy way out of this, or there's no karma free way out of this, that there's no consequence free out of this. So I think that's why people, because I've been trying to figure out like why do people respond so much and emotionally to that? Because and I think that it's because they don't want to believe that we're at a point and we reached a point that could potentially have repercussions that we don't like. Like for instance, like think about like the veganism, right? What are we going to do with all the cows that exist if everybody stopped eating meat, right? Because they don't have a natural habitat. Uh,
Taking
they're
the balance out of the cycle by trying to complete like create this, because I did see your post about surplus. And
yeah.
like when man thinks that abundance is like taking just a concentration of a specific resource, and
Mm,
then like that, I think that creates an opportunity for an increase in population because they have specifically concentrated this resource. And like now you've just kind of like taken the taken like just the balance of like for example, like my cousin, he grows strawberries, and usually he those are like a product through the window of winter and spring.
Hmm.
But like now it's like you have you can like go to the store and just buy like strawberries year
Year round.
round,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, it's taking away like the taste is not as sweet, and like, but anyways, my point is like when you try to corrupt or manipulate the natural cycle of which something exists, like you 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 kind of leave opportunities for other things to either decline in access or to either like grow in access. And I think too much of something is not good.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like this it's like homogenization versus diversity, right? Like that's what we're talking about, and this essentially the root of that is that, like, that post I had made about you have to, in order to get where we're at today, like you have to manipulate the food supply because you don't get a surplus to that capacity unless you manipulate the food supply. So typically, it's been grains or root vegetables that have been manipulated throughout different cultures so that they can grow their culture. But when you live like, say, like a hunter gatherer who kind of relies on the seasons and cycles of nature, you're not going to get a surplus like that. Like you're going to have enough for sure, but it's not going to be a surplus to where you can store it. Because first of all, to store it, now they're manipulating it so that it could have a higher shelf life. They're manipulating just so that they can have a surplus to even save. Well, now you got a surplus. Now you can grow the population. Now you can feed people year round, and so like all that's supposed to be regulated by cycles of nature, the ecology.
They should
So
take the Great Depression, for example, like when man had reached their climax of industrial production, and then like there was way too much going on because like there was just so much artificial like artifacts that
yeah,
was taking up way too much space. And like people look at the Great Depression as like, oh, like we're scarce, like we're scarce in resource. But like no, that's really just the karmic fate of man feeling like the abundance is like having unlimited access to something. And that's not the reality of life to me, because like everything must die.
yeah.
Everything must die.
I think it's important also to tell people and let them know, like just because we can observe something doesn't mean that like we're like, because people are talking about culling the population, and like I'm not talking about that at all. Like I'm just bringing awareness to how humans have behaved, and what the world that we created is a residual from that, is a consequence of that. I'm not saying that I'm making an argument for getting rid of the population or culling the population, but I do recognize that at some point there will be a shift, because there has to be, not in whether it's by man or by nature. And to me, like things like what's happening right now with, the whole epidemic, like that is one way that our reality manifests to bring that into balance. And that's the way I look at it, and people could say it's man-made and all these things, but whether it's that or something else, there's always going to be a balancer that's going to, because everything works in cycles. Like right now, humanity's up, but later humanity will be down. Like it'll go through a cycle. And that's what that my post was about, of going through civilization, rising, falling, going back to the land. So, I'm not an advocate to do anything. I'm just bringing awareness. Whatever you want to do with that personally, that's up to you. But I think that it helps that when we have this awareness to make certain decisions and to perceive the world in a certain way, we start moving differently, because now we just going based off of cause and effect, and not necessarily good and evil, where we're demonizing, oh, like people in the elite. Well, do something about it, move differently, choose a different fate for yourself, and you definitely can. So yeah, when we modify the food supply, we get overpopulation. And so if you modify the food supply, that becomes artificial because, like I said, the hand of man, the will of man has been put on that. So it's not something that arises naturally from the ecology. It's a thought. Somebody had a thought. Oh, what if we change that up? What if we save that and manipulate that? That's a thought. That's a human's thought that sprouted this offshoot of reality, which allowed all of this to happen. So when we look at it that way, it's like, okay, even if the population isn't overpopulated, minimum we can say it's artificial, meaning it wouldn't come to this level in the ecology without tampering with the ecology, because the ecology has mechanisms of regulating that. In order for a species to exist in certain populations, certain numbers, you have to have adequate food, water, and space. That's how wild animals are managed in wildlife management. So for humans, it's the same thing. Like, we wouldn't be able to grow past a certain extent based off of the natural ecology and the cycles of the natural ecology. It would all be self-regulated. But when you tamper with that, you destroy nature, you plant monocrops. Now you can be out of the bounds of what naturally occurs, you know? And so at minimum, we got to agree on that, or unless anybody can like present a compelling argument to why that's not artificial, then I would be willing to listen on that perspective as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I was able to share my 2 cents because, um, like, I think that what will also help is when people stop looking at like adversity and like negative occurrences regarding like the life or death cycle as like just the doomsday type vibe.
Right.
Like, just it's not it like it's I feel like everything is like already predestined and we're just kind of choosing our own path. And so like, like you said, there's always going to be repercussions to the things that you decide that you want to manifest.
Hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's facts. I appreciate. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you
All
for
right.
allowing me.
Yeah. I'm gonna bring somebody else in. Okay. Go. What up?
Yo, yo, what's good? What's good?
Not much,
Hey,
man. Just I'm ready to hear what you got to say.
I always got something right. All right. So to be clear, I'm on majorly your side of the argument because we're looking at this from like a theoretical standpoint. We already know which side of the coin we're on, but we have to look objectively and ask these questions that you're asking. And I go into that by first saying by prefacing my statement with this. There was once an animal, or there is still an animal called the red jungle fowl.
Mhm.
And this animal could reproduce eggs quicker than any other fowl. What animal did this turn into, Quetzal?
The jungle
That could
fowl, the chicken.
the chicken. So we have already been culling and cultivating. So when we were able to get an animal that produced more protein, we were able to eat that and in turn create a more diverse nutritional profile to keep us alive longer. So it kind of seems like our story here, the human story, has been in a sense of us figuring out more innovative ways for us to kind of push our species forward in order for us to, I don't know, maybe fulfill a grand design. So I'll open up with that.
Mm. Okay, I like that. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great perspective. And I don't feel like it's a competing, because, like I said, I don't look at things as right or wrong,
Yeah,
but because I recognize that this is what humans are doing. Like, I can't deny that. I
right.
can't deny that we're literally executing this behavior, and it's a part of us. And so, like, with a lot of these domesticated species, like, they're a part of us. We've lived alongside with them for so long that they're
Hmm.
kind of intrinsically tied into human existence. That's why I was making the remark that without us, cows have nowhere to go, because we kind of like took them in,
At
and
this
they don't have no
point,
natural habitat. Like, so unless they're living with a farmer, some get escape and be wild, but for the most part, there's not a place for them on the earth except besides the hand of man. For us to cultivate that. So same thing with a lot of the chickens and a lot of the domesticated animals. This has been a part of the evolution of humanity. Yeah. So my thing is like, I just look at it as a cycle. So I think that we go through that cycle, and it is my perception based off of the world that I see that we're like if you saw that post, like we're coming out of that cycle of building civilization and reconnecting back to the land because I see a lot of people's interest in that in the collective consciousness, and I also see a destabilization of civilization. You know, the politics and all that shit that's happening. But that's like I said, that's just my perspective on it.
No,
So
that's
so
true.
when I look at it, that's kind of what I see and why I make the statements that I do, not to vilify anybody, but just to recognize the time and place that we're at and what can I do to act accordingly. So if we're going back into connecting to the land cycle, well, let me get ahead of the game and learn what I need to learn so that I can be on point when that cycle really goes into play.
That's beautiful. I love that perspective, and that's to me the healthier perspective because we don't want to go back into like inequity or whatever the sense that will cause this cycle to start over again. Because once this cycle turns, we got a new cycle coming on the way, and that's the genetic revolution. But we'll get into that a little deeper in that conversation. What I want to say is, when we look at the onset overpopulation thought right now, what we see from our society is mainly capitalism, where we would see certain resources get poorly dispersed between all our different demographics, right? Like studies would show when people are happier, healthier, and wealthier, they tend to have less children. This is the balance between what people thought you were talking about when they thought you were talking about eugenics and transhumanism and culling the population. That's
Right.
not what you on. You're just posing the question. But when people are happier, healthier, and wealthier, they tend to have less children. That is studied. That is fact. But I don't even need a fact. I live in a village right now, and people in this village don't have much money. But what do they have a lot of? Children. Because children would mainly be doing work for them to help them, like sustain their families and stuff like that. So we have this misplacement and hoarding of resources that would pretty much like have the some of the population still feeling the need to like repopulate. Because to your point, the environment really dictates how much of these things you need, right? Like in your gut bacteria, if we was like comparing humans to cells, your gut bacteria wants to grow and proliferate, right? But it will let you know when it needs to stop reproducing. When an organism or a cell keeps reproducing after its, instruction, what is that called?
Cancer.
A cancer. You know what I'm saying? So we are. That's what. And so it's like this idea between like humans, like what is our purpose here? What are we trying to do? And if this is a cycle, maybe our cycle is to keep moving forward on this evolutionary process and then bring up our successors to supplant us and our ideas. And then I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to bring more topics in.
Yes. So to add to that point about reproduction and the differences between like civilized people or people who are in civilization, like they got jobs, careers, making money, getting exorbitant amount of resources, they tend to have less children. So like to me, that's just kind of like a sign that there is still a self-regulating mechanism behind us even being out of pocket with nature. And that manifests itself as, well, people they lose interest in creating families and having children. They focus on the self more so, and they find fulfillment through other things, which in turn brings the population down, right? So it's like a self-regulating mechanism in its own right. So I think that's where we're at right now. I think we just coming into that because, like you said, a lot of the people, like the food availability and the surplus that we have is in as far as human civilization is fairly recent, right? So because of industrial food and agriculture, that has really amplified the food production in the whole world, being able to feed a lot of more people. Now, is the quality of that food higher and is the quality of the people better because of it? I would argue that, but it has allowed people to reproduce and have more children. So as these cultures are coming up, like, so you go somewhere like Belize, Mexico, these people are having a lot of children because they have a lot of access to food. But then as you go higher and higher and start accumulating even more resources, you have the opposite effect.
Right.
You have people not wanting to have children, not really caring about family. And I was going to talk about this in a video and a reel, and I was trying to hold back, but I want to talk about I want to just throw it out there. There's an experiment called Universe 25 where this guy studies rats and this was his lifelong work. Basically, he put them in confined spaces and he reproduced them, and he did he generated certain scenarios that are very similar to what's happening right now in civilization. And the end result was that people didn't, like, the rats didn't want to reproduce anymore. The mothers lost their maternal instinct. It was a lot of the shit that we see in civilization happening right now. That's exactly what happened in his experiment, and it kept happening again and again. So much so that they started using this experiment as a model for societal collapse. So I just want to throw that out there, that this behavior kind of has been studied in other organisms as well.
Yeah, so it's like an inevitability, right? And so what we'll do to kind of rectify that situation is, to rectify that situation is that we're going to go into to kind of like thwart our impending doom to a genetic revolution where mostly IVF or pre-embryonic implantation genetic sequencing will be going on, where a mother would be, freezing their eggs and freezing their embryos and being able to pick and graft their society like that, right? Because in the 70s, China did a thing where, remember the one-child policy?
Right.
And through that time, it was kind of studied that they had kind of like stymied their population by 400 million during that 30 years. You know what I'm saying? But that kind of teeters along the lines of like eugenics and transhumanism, which has a bad taste in people's mouths.
And there's also repercussions that they're facing now, because a lot of the men aren't able to find. There's an imbalance between the two genders going on in China right now, which is a big issue that now they're coming in terms with because of that one-child policy. Because everybody preferred men over females. So if they were only allowed to have one child, most wanted to have a male. So they they were either killing or just basically women weren't
infanticide.
Infanticide. So that there's an imbalance right now in China to where there's more there's a limited supply of women because of that same effect. So it's just kind of echoing the same sentiment that when we manipulate things through the will of man and our ideas, that there's consequences to it.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm agree. So we're on the same page with that. So now when you look at the cycle which we're going into, and you say, all right, so we want to connect back with nature and go back. We really kind of got to, as a group, have this collective of what we think that nature is, and some of these more natural or more, let's say, like hereditary or biological changes that we have made to manipulate nature. And that will be the argument for people on the other side who's saying, okay, well, moving organisms into other organisms, this is still nature moving around nature. So that's why the population, like that stuff doesn't matter, because they'll keep growing it, because with the rise of GMO food, they'll be able to feed more people. Now, some people's rebut to that would be, genetic modified food doesn't have this nutrients or whatever, but genetic modified food is not new. It's been going on since the 70s. And they have data from the 70s that says that it is no different from regular food. You see what I'm saying? So that's going to keep pushing the population going. That with gene sequencing, where they'll be able to, where they already use CRISPR and stuff like that to edit genes of food, and then they'll be use that to edit genes of humans who live longer, and thus, once again, they'll be controlling the population that way. What do you say to that?
I say that GMO, genetically modifying organisms, and genetic engineering is a new version of something that has already existed long ago. It's along the same thought frame of let's modify the food supply. So selective breeding is, to me, the similar thing to that. We just didn't have the technology to edit the genes, but somebody wanted to select a specimen to create something because of, and this is where we're coming back into full circle, because somebody has said that overpopulation is a byproduct of, like, basically not what's like the opposite of abundance, like scarcity mindset, right? Yeah. So, but to me, no, modifying the food supply was a byproduct of scarcity mindset, because people didn't want to go without, so they wanted to make sure they had food, so they had to modify the supply so that they could grow year round, or so that they can have control of it in a way that was more manageable. So selective breeding, and then we get to mutation breeding, which is once they start introducing radioactive frequencies to the seeds and the plants to grow them. This is how a lot of the wheat was produced. So a lot of the wheat that's in the stores right now that says organic, its genetics probably is a byproduct of mutation breeding.
For sure.
But it's allowed to have that because of the regulations that, or for whatever
Right,
reason.
right.
But so people don't realize, besides the pesticides, besides the artificial fertilizers, we have genetics, and
Yeah,
genetics can be manipulated,
for
and then
sure.
you could sell a product that's organic because it wasn't sprayed with pesticides or fertilizers, but the
Fertilizer.
genetics of it has already been
Exactly.
tainted.
For sure.
You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right.
So,
That's
so
right.
when I look at genetic engineering, to me, it's just a derivative of that. And people think that we need to grow more food to save the world. But to me, the way I look at it is like, no, the more we modify the food supply, the more the population gets out of control. Because the closer we get to nature and its mechanisms, that self-regulates population growth. But if we modify and keep modifying it, this idea gets so like, oh, we got to feed more people. But like you said, a lot of it is just a displacement of resources. Like
Hmm.
even people who don't have a lot of resources waste a lot of resources. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Even
right.
just like fruit, like most people aren't making use of all the food that's on their property, even if they're
I can turn
poor,
my camera around right now. Yeah.
even if they don't got no resources. So even on that level, I think that there's so much that can be done to be more efficient with our food
Bam.
supply.
For sure.
You know what I mean? So
I agree. I
yeah,
agree. And I think that that takes us into a little more biotechnology. So when we think about overpopulation or displacement of resources, we already have enough technology to like comfortably set up most of people, even in like rural demographics with like irrigation systems and stuff that is green too, not just using power or electricity. We could use like solar power. And for us, the people who are into nature, and somebody wrote in the comments like, oh, this is not nature, this is not natural. Well, is grafting a jungle fowl natural then? Like, we have to really have these conversations objectively so that we can have a healthy perspective as we go into this new frontier, because that war is going to continue to grow. They're going to go from genetically modifying food to genetically modifying people, 100%, where a person will be born and they will be able to select or sequence genes so they won't even get certain diseases, or they may not even need to use certain energy.
right.
This is like a fact. They already like have identified majority of the genes that kind of like play a pivotal role in longevity, play a pivotal role in advertence to certain genetic illnesses and things of that nature. So we, like you said, people, like, I can turn my camera around right now and I'll show you coconuts on these trees that have been sitting there for 6 months. Like, the people can't even use their own resources because what they're getting from the mainstream world is that they're not profitable to have this coconut. Like, it doesn't do nothing for you. What is that? You know
Right.
what I'm saying?
And that's true. That's a good point. A lot of the food that people eat is based off of their perception too. So when a lot of these studies that are, especially like around meat and this whole plant versus meat argument, it's a lot of has to do with perception. So because, like, say, meat is looked at something bad in the culture,
Right.
only the people that have a predisposition to be like rebellious are going to partake in that. But
Mm-hmm.
what other things do rebellious people do? They probably smoke, they probably drink, they probably don't give a fuck about a lot of shit. So then it creates like only the people who have a predisposition to be rebellious and have a certain lifestyle are the ones eating these things. So then when we see their life, we're like, oh, see, you don't want to end up like them. But it wasn't really that particular thing. It was just that the culture in that particular
Right.
place made it so that it was only acceptable for the ostracized to participate in it. So along with
Mm-hmm.
this, like, say you a lot of these countries, like if, we've been to Costa Rica, Mexico, they don't really value a lot of shit that we're trying to value now, like fruit and stuff,
Right.
because of this same phenomenon. So they want to go to the grocery store. They want to have the experience with all these foods that have been created, genetically modified. They're not really looking at it from a perspective of natural or not. And they have every right to, right? They have every right to participate in this new world because we're trying to go to
Mm-hmm.
their world. Shit, they have the right to want to go to where we came from.
Let's
Go
switch.
have that
Let's switch.
experience. But we're
Yeah.
like, nah, we came from there. We trying to go back to nature, right?
Right.
So that's the difference between those two things. But like you said, a lot. So that's why it goes back to my point. A lot of the food that exists in their environments isn't valued or utilized as much as it would be because of the introduction of a lot of these genetically modified foods that they can have probably cheaper and greater access to by just going in the grocery store.
Beautiful. Very well eloquated. Very well put. So then that stands to for us to round out, and this will be like our last point, and we can let somebody else come on. That'll round out our point is for us going back into these natural environments, right? What is acceptable for us? What is nature? What is like, because there also is a thing called epigenetics, and I guess that's people more feel more comfortable when you're using something natural to evolve in this natural subset, like it's setting. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But we kind of alter the course of how things grow, and that's something that we always have done. I think that instead of kind of having like a guilt complex around that, we need to more accept that. That way we can have a healthy perspective and put better caps on that. Because
Right.
we can't cap, we won't be able to cap where society or civilization is going, because they will justify their actions with what happened in the last action. Oh, so you saying I can't justify this, but there was 800 million eggs from 8 billion chickens that used to be, you see what I'm saying? Like, they'll be able to justify moving forward. So for us, all the people who want to live natural life, who want to, like, use natural remedies, and the beautiful sister came on and she said a thing like, oh, we don't want to die, and you said that too, but don't, like, you can say all you want, but if I was living in the tribe with my man Wild Pretzel, and he had a child, because I don't want to ever put that on you, and your child is, some parents are going to do whatever they can to take care of their child, you know what I'm saying? And we cannot, we won't never be able to vilify them for that, because organisms have the right to try to
Oh yeah,
survive, you know what I'm saying?
I
So
definitely
that's what
get
that
that.
will go into. So that's where herbal medicine comes from. So now we're sick, and that's like saying, so when we talk about natural and unnatural, that means that even if we're sick, we're supposed to take that fate and say, nature, you make me sick, so I'm, when there's something in your natural ecology that can probably fix that. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And then those things have been evolved and turned into medicine. All medicines are synthesized versions of plants, animals, and bacteria or species. You know what I'm saying? So for us going back into nature, we need to have a more healthy perspective of what natural is, what we're able to change or intervene on, and then what type of technologies, listen, yes, I'm saying this, guys, what type of technologies we're going to utilize in order to make sure that resources are properly dispersed against to people, so that way we don't kind of like, at least when we repeat this cycle, we'll be better off for it.
Right. No, that's the great point, and I agree with that. Like, there's definitely a balance between, because we fall out of balance, or we lose track of ourselves. So this is where disease manifests. This is where illness manifests because of this. So we come back into balance by using different things, right? But the whole death concept and the death phobia is a whole different thing. Like, it's like literally being at your deathbed and not wanting to move on. Like, right? Like, you lived a life,
Yeah.
you lived,
Yeah.
had a beautiful experience, you had children, you passed on your genes, and you're still not able to cope with the reality of your own mortality. That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about more so, because obviously
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's a human nature for us to want to preserve ourselves, to want to preserve our offspring, and all of
Right.
that. Like, I don't blame anybody for all of that, but our technologies have gone to a point that intention can be amplified many times over. So we
Yeah.
can keep people alive for decades
For
on
sure.
respirators in hospitals. That's a big difference from going out and getting an herb because you're out of
Yeah.
balance. So there has to be like some discernment between that, because I think that although this instinct is natural, that the technology and things that we've created allow for this instinct to manifest in ways that aren't conducive to the collective.
Yeah. I agree there, because like you said, preserving life at 90, because in the ancient time, the average lifespan was like worldwide was like 18 years old. That doesn't mean that most people die at 18. That means like the average, when you average it,
Right,
18,
including
20
like
people would
infant
die,
death and stuff like that.
including like infant death and stuff like that. So people, then got nutritional profiles, got better access to shelters and medicines and stuff like that to start to preserve that. And I think that once that mechanism starts, it gets hard to encapsulate, because it gets to a point where it's like, well, how can you say this or that? There was like an experiment done where they actually like parabiosis, where they was actually able to like take an older mouse and sew this mouse together with a younger mouse, and that the stem cells in from the side of the younger mouse essentially made the older mouse younger. You know what I'm saying? So this is where we're going, right? And then with the emergence of that's like the genetic revolution, and then it's going to be coupled with this big data and big tech revolution, where we'll see the emergence of AI and biotechnology, where we'll start to merge with these systems. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
then overpopulation, that it may not even be a thing if everybody's just inside of their box and their cube plugged into the no
Right.
bullshit though. if they
Yeah,
plugged
well,
into the metaverse and they end up plugged, they get in like pills to make sure they instill longevity, and most of the time spent living inside of a system. You know
right.
what I'm saying? Like, who cares about? You can have these pods stacked up into. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
Who cares
but
about
it's just so
overpopulation at that point?
isn't it so interesting how we're literally walking into that and
For sure.
nobody's saying shit. Like most of the population is like, yeah, let's do this, and I get it, because there's this, but it's literally like we've been talking about the Matrix since woke was woke, right? Like that was the whole
Exactly.
concept. Like
For
let's
sure.
not get sucked into beings, and that's exactly what's manifesting. And I think it is a derivative of also what we're talking about is trying to avoid death. And so
Yeah.
it's like you're trying to preserve your consciousness, right? You want to preserve your
Right.
consciousness, and it doesn't matter if it's through a organic, living, breathing muscle suit, or it's through a neural network that's
For
connected to
sure.
a fucking database. It don't matter. Like as long as you can preserve your consciousness, that's what
Right.
people are. But what's the root of that? Oh, you don't want to exist. Oh, because you don't want to die. Like
For
you
sure.
you don't want to. To me, like death is our last rite of passage in this lifetime, and
Right.
and and I look at it as something that we all share, that we're all going to go through. Um,
Mhm.
and obviously, like you said, like there's going to be times where we're out of balance, or we just need a herb, or we need to do some healing. But there's all inevitably going to be a time where we need to go through that rite of passage
Transition.
and see what's
Transition.
on the
Yeah.
other side. Like
For
we
sure.
we
That's
we
right.
speculate, and we have theories and ideas about it, but that's the human experience isn't complete until you go through that. You know
I
what I mean?
agree. I agree 100%. I agree 100%. And then, but I'm just telling you that, and we're gonna leave it there. But just
Yeah.
that is I believe that's beautifully put. That is our rite of passage. But like you said, like just some people won't see it that way. You know what I'm saying? Like for instance, like if the life expectancy was 18, when you got more elders in your environment, you allow more information to be passed down longer. You know what I'm saying? In this society, we kind of move the elders to the side if they're not productive in a way that causes them to make more money,
Right.
rather than instill wisdom upon us and like like some of these like natural things to kind of keep us in balance. So since we moved that to the side, now these people with money are going to be looking to kind of avert death if they possibly can. You know what I'm saying? And I think that their argument there is clear, and it has some ground to it. But once again, we know which side of the argument we're on, so we're splitting up and going into two different worlds. So it's all about us having a healthy perspective and a conscious mindset to know what we're taking with us and how we're going to proceed to go forth. And I'm gonna leave it
Right.
there, yo.
And I think a lot of people have a lot of attachment to the system. They have a lot of attachment to civilization. So when I talk about this, it's like it kind of brings to
Triggering,
light that
yeah.
there's something happening that and don't get me wrong, like I appreciate technology. Like I like technology because I'm a byproduct of civilization. Like I come from that
Yeah.
too. I wasn't born in the jungle, in a tribe, even though I appreciate the values and the principles and the lifestyle and the harmony that brings. But who I am essentially is a byproduct of that civilization. So I get that. So whenever I bring this up, it's not because I don't have no attachments to civilization or to the
Yeah.
things that it's created. It's because I'm just trying to see clearly how we can move forward in a way that benefits humanity. And when I say
And
humanity,
nature, yeah,
yeah, the
everybody.
collective,
Yeah.
everything, harmony, right? So for me, for humanity to continue, it don't need to be 8 billion people. It just needs to be eh, um, enough. It just needs to be enough, and that's the whole thing behind the cycles. So even if it's like if you go hunt an animal, you can't mourn over the species because you killed an animal for you to eat
Right.
because you didn't kill the species, right? The species lives on and is
Yeah.
actually enhanced by that behavior because predators enhance the species that they hunt. But so same thing with humanity. Yes, humans are dying and they will continue to die, and there might come a time when a lot of people die, but that doesn't mean that humanity has to go extinct. And I think a part of that
Right.
is instilling the principles of nature and how to live in harmony with that to a certain number of population of the human population so that they can exist without civilization when that time comes. Like that's how I look at it,
Yeah.
So that's what we're
Yeah.
doing. We're
Yeah.
learning the skills. We're trying to be sovereign away from the system, not because we despise it or we hate it, but because we understand that there might come a time, and there probably will come a time, maybe not in our lifetime, but in existence where that cycle will restart itself and reseed
Right.
itself. And we need to be prepared for that, not from like
I
a
agree.
scarcity or fear mindset, but just from an awareness, just conscious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think like I don't have this like I'm not like a prepper type of person who's like scared of what's about to
A
happen
doomsday
or
prepper, yeah.
yeah, or like I'm scared of the elite. Nah, I'm just literally aware of my reality and I'm trying to make the best decisions from a place
Yeah.
of balance and logic and strategy. That's all
And you
that
can
I'm
clearly see,
doing.
and you can clearly see the inevitability. You can clearly see like where we're going to, and you're saying like, yeah, I don't want to participate in that. So like, let me just do my own thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's how it is, man. So, man, that like we leaving it there. Hopefully, we left a lot for people to kind of like digest and marinate on. Yeah, it was a good, great build on. You already know
Yeah.
me, and we already on it. We be building all the time. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think so.
And like
Yeah. Anybody
anybody hit me up. I got. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Actually, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just gonna say,
Say
yeah,
it, man.
follow Twan. You know, if you're interested in whatever he said, he brought a lot of great points, and so yeah, hit him up, follow him, and you know, we continue to do these builds. I always appreciate when you come on because you bring a good perspective.
For sure. You too, man, bro. Keep it up, yo.
All right, take care.
You're
All right, so anybody else want to come on? Let me see. There's one more person in the request, and I'm gonna see if they want to come in if they're still in the room, see what they had to say. But that was good. Yeah, like the video so that I get more exposure and send it to anybody that you feel, you know, could benefit from these thoughts that are being shared. And if you want to come on camera, just send a request or just leave a comment and I'll try to bring you in. All right, so Lumina said there isn't a reason to fear the elite, but to say it doesn't have an effect on like on on land, for example, is unrealistic. If you have to pay taxes on your land, you ain't free. Yeah, so the way I think about it is like I realize that we're in this current situation that I might not agree with and that it might not be manifesting the way I would like it, but I try to navigate it in a way that allows me to have the experience that I want to have. So even though I'm not for like buying up land and owning land in the ways that it is, I have to realize that the world that we exist in right now as it is being regulated through the belief systems of the majority of the population, right? So I can't go just anybody's property and just pick their fruit. Like I can do that, but there's going to be repercussions. There's police and there's all kinds of institutions that are set up to discourage that kind of behavior. So with that understanding, I have to move with that. Is it worth it for me to go and move in a way on this earth that I want to move, even though I know that there's a system in place to basically have consequences for me to do that? Or do I want to maneuver in this current world that we exist in a way that allows me to have the kind of life that I want? So like you can buy land and not believe in owning land, but you're doing that to try to live the reality that you want to live. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's all in our mind anyways. It's just being regulated and put into place by a system, by a group of people. But as soon as that disappears, okay, then we're just left with nature. Now we're just left with the inherent nature of things, right? So, but until that moment comes, we have to move in a way that takes everything into consideration, right? Like I would love to just go out into anybody's property, but I know I can do that, but there's going to be repercussions. So with that in mind, that's how I move. You know, so I'm just kind of building up myself, my skill set, my knowledge, my awareness of life so that I can have the adequate skills so that I'm prepared for anything. And that's how I look at it. I know that there's people in control. And matter of fact, if there was this many people on Earth and if there was this much potential for control, I can see why people would want to do it. It's obvious why people would want to control populations. And it's almost necessary because most people aren't in control of their own life. So by the byproduct, they need a lot of people need to be led and controlled by people. And merely as a consequence of them not having their own life in control and order. So they're looking for people to follow. They're looking for people to guide and lead them. So obviously, when this vacuum is created, there's a space that's filling it. So there's a group of people who have the kind of influence and power and money and resources to be able to execute these things. But if you're aware, you can move in such a way to where that's not suppressing your full expression. You can maneuver in a way to where you're still finding purpose and fulfillment through your life, despite the craziness that's going on in the world, despite all that. So I don't put a lot of focus and emphasis on that because I'm way more focused on doing what I can with what I have in the current reality that we exist in. It's not because I don't believe that that doesn't exist. It's just for me, there's a lot less resistance in that path of choosing to do what I can do in this current moment in time. All right, let me bring somebody else in the room. All right. Hey, peace, brother.
Hey, what's going on, brother? Thank you for bringing me on, man. I'm pretty new to your page. A friend of mine started sharing your post, and one of the things, I'll talk on what you're talking about, but one of the things that stood out to me that I never saw about before, because we've watching what you talk about, the plant-based diet and how people are, headed in that direction. One thing I never thought about was that as, I guess, as hunter and gatherers, we actually used to be like almost, we were the ones that were conserving these animals. And the first thing that came to
Hmm.
mind was like Native Americans of North America, where they relied on the buffalo, and that was something sacred, something that they cared for, that they nurtured, regardless of what it provided. It was a source that they needed to keep going. And I never really thought about that until you said that, until you brought that up. And I just want to say thank you. I'm glad that I came across your page, and the information that you're sharing. um, the subject that you're talking about, I found it kind of, I don't know if I still think of it the same way, but I used to think of our behavior as like a cancer on Earth. There's,
Hmm.
we have Mother Earth is a living organism, and we are living organisms, and we are multiplying at a constant rate. But instead of conserving what we have, we're constantly consuming. We're,
Hmm.
we're, you know, taking up the resources without replacing them in any kind of way. And so I used to kind of look at us as like a cancer, but I guess as I'm educating myself more and more, I don't want to see the human population or say, hey, we're just a cancer. Rather, we're so far off from who we used to be, our natural essence, being the that going back to nature, so to speak, kind of what you're doing with your family, which is what a lot
Hmm.
of us, it's kind of funny that you say a lot of us want to go in that direction as other people are trying to switch spots with us, which
Yeah.
made total sense. I think a lot of us have come to a point in time where um, I think we are educating and we're frustrated with what's going on around us, that we're trying to find a, a more peaceful place. And we're starting to realize that that peaceful place is actually going back to our roots where we used to be.
Right.
Because we're no longer being consumers, we're being conservationists, so to speak. And so that's why I really appreciate a lot of the information that you share. It's kind of hard to follow up what you and the last guy had going on, because you guys are sharing some great facts, and I just followed him too. I didn't know anything about his page, but
You
everything
bring
that you
some
guys
really
are
good
talking.
points up. Yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your energy. And that topic, I think it plays a big role because, well, first I want to talk about what you said, the plant-based versus animal-based and plants versus animals concept. Um, and one of the things that we didn't say was that there's also a decline in reproduction, like on plant-based diets, right? So sperm motility and certain reproduction goes lower on a plant-based diet. And there's a lot of studies to show that. So even that in itself could be a mechanism for balancing that out, right? So if people can't reproduce, the population goes down naturally. That's what I'm saying. I believe that there is mechanisms that are built in that regulate all of this, regulate the population growth through whatever method is necessary. But yeah, like to the whole thing that like humans are cancers, I believe that that's a choice. I believe that we live in an age of information that we have access to, that we can decide whether we want to be of benefit and harmony to the earth, or whether we want to be clueless and not pay attention to anything that we could do to possibly uh, bring that harmony about. So there's people who do want to live that way. I don't look at them as evil. I think they're playing their role. That's the role they came to play. That's how they manifested. But I do see a lot of interest in people who are wanting to reconnect with nature, reconnect with themselves, because that we are nature, but to serve a role in the ecology that's harmonious and that is in balance with primary with self and with the ecology, with everything around us, right? So I think that it's a choice. I think we can be both. So, it's just about the person, and the consciousness. Because at some point you could have said that, and this is a whole other topic, but you could have said like, oh, white people are the problem because they bring colonization, all this thing. But the thing is that it's about consciousness. We live in a point in time where you can't tell who's who anymore. Like I can't just look at somebody who has darker skin or looks like me and be like, oh, this is what they believe or this is how they live. Because humanity has cross-pollinated so much that now we have to look at people's consciousness and their behavior and their actions, regardless of their skin color, because that's not the reality we live in anymore. Maybe at one time it was, but ideas have cross-pollinated the minds of people that you have European people wanting to live in tune with nature, and you have the people that are coming, the melanated, darker skinned people who are wanting to be president, wanting to be lawyers, wanting to exist in that world to its highest potential. So that's what I look at, the consciousness of the person, and I make a determination on who they're being based off of that consciousness. So you could be a cancer, or you could be an immune cell. You could be part of the of the help, or you could be part of the problem. So that it's a choice. We have a choice.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think, going back to just that one post about how you were talking about conserving what we eat, that kind of shifted my perspective in a lot of different ways because, I never thought about it that way. You have so many, you have so many experts out there, and you don't have experts who are being how do you say, like you, where you're standing from a point of observation, not so much a point of opinion. You're not just pushing what you believe. You're trying to speak on things from a broader perspective to gain an understanding from both sides so that both sides can come to, kind of like a not that we have to agree, but to have an understanding of
Yeah.
what's most important in whatever argument you may be making or whatever subject you're talking about. And that's why I say I don't know that I feel the same way of calling the human race a cancer anymore, because at that time when I thought that, even my understanding of cancer wasn't that good. So I
Mm.
think I used to just see us as a group of people that were constantly consuming. And in those times, I guess when I was thinking about that, people weren't really on social media, I guess pursuing a better life or sharing information like yourself, where you're trying to guide people in whatever direction you feel is right. In those times, I was very uneducated. So like, I used to kind of just see it as again, we're just consuming. But I think as I've grown older, you're right. It's a matter of where you're at in your own consciousness and how you perceive your world. I always tell
Mm.
people your truth is the truth because that's what you believe in. So it's you can't really I guess change that for someone. They can only change it for themselves with the right amount of information.
And also,
So
your personal experience is a reflection of your actions, your environment. So if the reason I don't really feel like I'm not focused on people or cancer, because I live in a way and I try to surround myself and live in an environment where I don't feel like that's all of existence, right? But like if you put yourself in a city, you'll look around and be like, fuck, what are we doing? You'll really feel like that's the only thing that exists, right? But the more you start interacting with other like-minded people, you start realizing, no, a lot of people actually want to be in harmony. They want to do better. They have a good intention, and they really are trying to connect with that part of themselves. So I think that a lot of times what we believe and what we choose to see and put our energy on is a reflection of our own actions and a reflection of where we are in our own consciousness. We haven't executed enough to be able to put ourselves in a position where we feel good about life, or we can see the goodness in other people, because we're surrounded by so much of the imbalance that we're unable to put focus and emphasis on the people out there who are actually doing good things in the world.
that makes a lot of sense. I tell people I got stuck there and they can't understand it. But I live in San Francisco. I'm not in San Francisco right now, but that's where I live. And
Yeah.
I've been there for a little over 2 years, and it's just like just the energy in my building alone. It just feels like there's, especially with what just happened, and with everybody being locked down and whatnot, you can feel how, I guess you could say, I don't want to say negative energy, but you could just feel this energy that's not aligned with what I want and who
Yeah.
I want to be. And so like it's been difficult to find people who you can align with in that city, because it's like the majority of the people actually want to be there.
Right.
Versus someone like me, I'm
That's
trying to
called
figure out a way to
destructive.
escape.
Yeah,
What
that's
was
called
that?
destructive interference. It's like when two frequencies that like basically interfere with one another in a destructive way. Like that's the feeling that you're feeling. But
Uh,
when you find yourself around frequencies, which is like the consciousness of the people that are actually building you up, that's called constructive. So you increase and amplify what you already are. So that's the reason that people are trying to find their tribe and trying to find who they resonate with, because they want that constructive interference. They want more of this of what they already are, and they can do that by finding people who are also on the same vibration tip as them. But yeah, if you put yourself in an environment around people who don't vibe like you or don't think like you, that's not going to feel good. Just because you're interacting with other people in a destructive manner where your frequencies don't help each other out. They go against one another.
that makes a lot of sense. Well, I don't think I have too much more, man. I really do appreciate everything that you do, deliver to us. And, like I said, I think most of us that are following you are trying to find a way to find that peace that you seem to have created around you and your family. And that's beautiful. And I think that should be the goal. But, we live in a society where we're so technologically advanced that I think we feel like we're missing out if we don't stay in these big cities, or around the technology and stuff like that.
Yeah, no,
But
yeah, for sure. I mean, I appreciate it. I'm grateful, and I still deal with everything just as much as anybody. I think for me, it was going into the darkness, going into the parts of myself that I didn't want to go into, that has helped me to manage my life in a better way. So you kind of have to go further in to get into the light. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
not about getting away from the darkness or getting away. It's about facing it more head on so that you can tolerate it. It's just like building up your muscle, like you building up that resistance, that stress to be able to handle whatever your life throws at you. So I think
right,
that's more of that along terms of what you see. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. I'm grateful.
right on, man. Thank you.
All right. All right, let me see if there's anybody else that wants. Oh, you know what? I think I'm done because I was on a time schedule and my hour is up. We got everybody here going live. So different people going live at different times. I don't want to take up the Wi-Fi and the airwaves. So I'm just gonna call that conclusion. This was a really good build. I really appreciated building, talking with the people that came on. Appreciate the comments and all the feedback and all the conversation that's happening. I love that we can come on here and have a conversation, even when our views seem to be opposing, even when there's a lot of emotion, but we can compose ourselves enough to just have a conversation, because if we can't even have a conversation, we can't communicate, and if we can't communicate, then we can't find understanding, and if we don't have understanding, well, there's going to be hate. That's just the opposite of understanding, is misunderstanding, which is why people hate each other, why people are out to get each other, because they're not understanding one another. So the basis of that is being able to talk and communicate with one another. That's exactly what we're doing here, and I hope to have more conversations like this in the future, going on more topics, because I got a lot of content coming. I still have a whole notebook of ideas and topics that we need to discuss, just to bring clarity to the whole situation and just come to a balanced place. I know when we come from like the world that we live in, it's like a pendulum. It's up here, so the pendulum swings, and we want to be at the other extreme. But at some point, we just got to come to the middle and realize that that's the balance point, and that we can embody a little bit of both, and not making sure not to be too extreme. So that's how I look at it. So I appreciate you guys for coming in here, and I will see you guys next time. Stay balanced. Peace.